It all began with a simple question that humans have been asking for thousands of years. What if I just put my food between two pieces of bread? Let's travel back in time. Not 300 years, not even 1,000 years. Let's go back over 2,000 years to ancient Judea. In the 1st century BCE, a respected Jewish scholar named Hillel the Elder was helping shape the traditions of the Passover Seder, a ceremonial meal commemorating the Exodus from Egypt. Among the many symbolic foods on the table were bitter herbs and a sweet paste called charosé, meant to represent the mortar used by enslaved Israelites in Egypt. Hillel suggested something practical. Instead of eating these elements separately, why not place the bitter herbs and charosé between two pieces of unleavened flatbread called matzah and eat them together? This combination, flavors layered between bread, became known as the Hillel sandwich, and to this day it remains part of the traditional Passover meal. No one at that ancient table could have imagined that this small ceremonial gesture would echo across 2 millennia and eventually give birth to one of the most eaten foods on earth. But Hillel was far from alone in this idea. Long before him, and continuing for centuries after, people across the ancient world had already been placing food onto or between bread out of pure practicality. In ancient Rome and medieval Europe, thick, dense slices of stale bread called trenchers were used as edible plates. Meat, stew, and vegetables were piled on top, and once the meal was finished, the bread, now soaked in flavorful juices, was often eaten too, sometimes given to servants or the poor, sometimes enjoyed by diners themselves. It wasn't quite a sandwich as we know it today, but the idea, bread as a vessel for flavor, was already deeply rooted in human eating habits, all across the world, completely independent of one another. Flatbreads folded around fillings appeared in Middle Eastern, South Asian, and Mesoamerican traditions long before Europe's story even begins. Now let's fast forward. The calendar turns to the 18th century, and our story arrives at the moment most people actually associate with the sandwich's true birth. The year is 1762. The place is England. John Montagu, the fourth Earl of Sandwich, was a British nobleman with a reputation for two very different things: his political career and his love of gambling. According to the most famous version of this story, the Earl was in the middle of an intense card game, one that he refused to interrupt, even for dinner. Rather than leave the table, he instructed his servants to bring him a simple meal: slices of cold meat tucked between two pieces of bread that he could eat with one hand while continuing to hold his cards with the other. Fellow gamblers, noticing this convenient creation, reportedly began asking for the same as sandwich. And just like that, a name was born. Historians today debate how much of the story is fact and how much is legend. Some suggest the Earl actually ate this way, not at a card table, but at his writing desk, too consumed with naval administrative work to stop for a proper meal. Either way, the story spread, the name stuck, and by the late 1700s, the word sandwich had entered the English language to describe any filling placed between two slices of bread. What had existed in various forms across nearly every culture on Earth for thousands of years now finally had a single unifying name. The sandwich had officially arrived, not at least in name. From England, the idea spread quickly across Europe and eventually across the Atlantic Ocean. In the 1800s, as industrialization transformed daily life, the sandwich found its true calling. Factory workers, coal miners, and office clerks across Britain and the growing United States needed food that was portable, quick to eat, and required no utensils or sit-down time. The sandwich was, quite simply, perfect for the modern age. By the mid-1800s in America, the sandwich had become a staple of working-class meals. Simple combinations: bread, cheese, cured meats, filled lunch pails carried by laborers heading into factories, railroads, and mines. Now let's pause and travel to a very particular corner of American food history: New York in the 1890s. At the Elegant Union Club, a chef combined roasted turkey or chicken, crisp bacon, lettuce, and tomato between three slices of toasted bread, cut diagonally into triangles and held together with decorative toothpicks. This elaborate creation became known as the club sandwich, and it quickly became a symbol of upscale American dining. A sandwich elevated elevated to fine cuisine. Meanwhile, in immigrant communities across American cities, entirely new sandwich traditions were taking shape. Italian immigrants arriving in cities like Philadelphia, New York, and New Orleans brought with them a love of crusty bread, cured meats, cheeses, and vegetables, ingredients that soon combined into what would become known by many different names depending on the city: the submarine sandwich, the hoagie, the hero, the grinder, the po' boy. Each city claimed its own version. Each city insisted its version was the original, the best, the only true one. Sound familiar? It's a pattern we've seen again and again in the story of food. In New Orleans specifically, the po' boy has its own dramatic origin story. In 1929, during a streetcar workers' strike, two brothers who ran a small restaurant, former streetcar conductors themselves, began giving free sandwiches to the striking workers. These sandwiches, stuffed generously with roast beef or fried seafood on crispy French bread, became known as poor boys, eventually shortened to po' boys in honor of the struggling strikers who received them. A sandwich born from solidarity, a sandwich that carried a story of labor, struggle, and generosity within every bite. As the 20th century unfolded, the sandwich only continued to multiply into countless new forms. In 1926, a comic strip character named Dagwood Bumstead became famous for building enormous, towering, multi-layered sandwiches stacked with an almost absurd number of ingredients. These wildly exaggerated creations became so culturally iconic that oversized sandwiches are still sometimes called Dagwood sandwiches today. During the Great Depression and the decades that followed, one particular sandwich became a defining symbol of American childhood: the peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Cheap, filling, and endlessly customizable, it became a staple in school lunchboxes across the country, a tradition that continues in millions of American homes to this day. By the mid-1900s, fast food restaurants had discovered the sandwich's true commercial power. Hamburgers, themselves a specific category of sandwich as we explored in an earlier story, had already conquered the world. But soon, entire restaurant chains built their identities specifically around sandwiches. Submarine sandwich chains stretching across highways and shopping malls. Sandwich shops promising fresh ingredients assembled right before your eyes. Meanwhile, immigrant communities around the world continued adding their own extraordinary chapters to the sandwich's global story. In Vietnam, French colonial influence introduced the baguette in the 1800s. Vietnamese cooks transformed this foreign bread into something entirely their own: the bánh mi, a crusty baguette filled with pickled vegetables, fresh herbs, chili, and various meats. A perfect fusion of French technique and Vietnamese flavor, born from colonization but reshaped entirely into a proud, independent culinary identity. In the Middle East, flatbreads had been wrapped around grilled and roasted meats for centuries, evolving into the modern doner kebab, shawarma, and gyro, dishes that would later travel to Europe with Turkish, Lebanese, and Greek immigrants, becoming beloved late-night street food across cities like Berlin, London, and Athens. In India, the vada pav, a spiced potato fritter tucked into a soft bread roll, emerged in Mumbai in the 1960s as an affordable, filling meal for the city's mill workers, quickly becoming one of the most beloved street foods in the entire country. Every culture, it seemed, had independently arrived at the same brilliant idea: wrap something delicious in bread, and you have a meal that travels with you, fits in your hand, and asks for nothing but your appetite. Today, the sandwich exists in more forms than almost any food on earth: cold cuts on crusty rolls, grilled cheese melting between buttered slices, elaborate gourmet creations served at high-end restaurants for extraordinary prices, simple, humble combinations wrapped in wax paper and carried in a child's lunchbox. So the next time you take a bite of a sandwich, whatever kind it may be, remember this: you are tasting an idea that stretches back over 2,000 years to a rabbi's thoughtful suggestion at a Passover table. You are tasting the practical genius of medieval bread trenchers and the very particular story of a gambling bumbling English nobleman who simply didn't want to leave his card game. You are tasting the struggle and solidarity behind a New Orleans po' boy, the towering ambition of a comic strip character's imagination, and the resilience of immigrant communities who transformed foreign ingredients into entirely new culinary traditions of their own. From an ancient ceremonial table in Judea to an English card room to factory lunch pails to street corners in Hanoi, Mumbai, and Istanbul, and finally to the sandwich sitting in your own two hands today. This is a journey that belongs to nearly every culture on Earth, all at once. Perhaps the world's most universal history lesson is hidden between two simple slices of bread.